Hi, and welcome to another episode of Disrupt Your Now, the show for entrepreneurs who are ready to shake things up. And before we get started, if you're one of those people who are feeling kind of stuck in your business or frustrated, pick up one of my books. Oops, wrong way. Boomer Cash Out. If you're interested in increasing the value of your business to sell for retirement, or Disrupt Your Now, if you want to disrupt your now and turn someday into right now. Michael Hingson, my guest tonight, is a perfect example of somebody who's disrupted his now in so many ways. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you. I hope we get to disrupt some other people's nows.
I hope so too. So I'm just going to say really quickly, Michael is a survivor from 9/11. I'm sure y'all have seen him in the news. I did all those years ago. It is crazy to believe that it's been 21 years, but his guide dog, Roselle, helped him get out of the World Trade Center. And I'm sure also helped other people, Michael. So, and as you know, my dad was blind. So when I heard your story originally, it was just so touching to me. And so last year when we met, I was so excited to be able to meet you and so honored to be able to meet you. So welcome to the show and thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah. So tell the audience a bit about your background.
Well, let's see. Gosh, where do I begin? Okay. Lewis Carroll would say at the beginning. So I was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1950. And I was born 2 months premature and was given a pure oxygen environment, which caused the retina not to form properly, at least in part.
Oh.
Although we didn't discover that for about 4 months. And the way we discovered it is my aunt um, noticed that I wasn't really reacting to sunlight because I was over by a window and it wasn't bothering me a bit. So they took me to the hospital and discovered that, in fact, I was blind. And the
Oh.
doctors told my parents to send me to a home for handicapped people because no blind child could ever grow up and amount to anything and
Uh-huh.
do anything. And my parents said, "You guys are wrong. Absolutely, he can grow up to do anything that he chooses to do with his life, and we're going to give him that opportunity." So my parents were risk takers. They
Hmm.
let me explore. They let me wander around the neighborhood. I walked down to the local candy store in Chicago, I love to tell people, and got orange Byerly drinks all the time and pretzel rods. And although they just called them pretzels back then, the big, thick sticks.
Yeah.
But I did that. And then at the age of 5, we moved to California to a little town called Palmdale, which is about 65 miles north of Los Angeles and didn't have very many people in it at all. It was a rural town, but after 2 years, I decided I met someone there, a little girl who moved in next door, or not next door, but just down the street. And she let me borrow her bike, and I learned to ride a bike. And then my parents got me my own bike and things like that. So we, I learned to ride a bike. I learned to walk around my neighborhood. When I was in Chicago in kindergarten, we had a special class for blind kids. So in that class, I actually learned Braille. But then when we moved to Southern California, we didn't have any classes or access to Braille books that kept that going for a few years. So I kind of forgot a lot of it. But between third and fourth grade, we learned that the school district had enough blind children that they were now hiring a teacher called a resource teacher, somebody who would have a room in the school who would be able to provide the assistance that blind kids needed to learn the skills that they needed to learn. So for me, it was a lot of learning more about Braille again and freshening up my skills. And my mother and I did some of that during the summer, and then we continued it in the fall when I went back to school.
Hmm.
And so I went into fourth grade having access to Braille books because the teacher, Mrs. Hirschberger, knew how to get the materials. And so I started actually having books again. And then it kind of went from there. My brother had joined the Cub Scouts and then the Boy Scouts, and I joined a little bit of the Cub Scouts, then also went straight into Boy Scouts and went into high school, went to a regular class in all of my elementary schools and junior high and then into high school. But going into high school, we thought that that was going to be a much bigger campus and a lot more complicated. So, not having learned to use a cane or a guide dog until then, because it was easy enough for me to walk around my neighborhood not get lost and walk around the school and not get lost. But going into high school was a different situation. We had met a woman named Sharon Gold, who was a teacher at Edwards Air Force Base. She was blind. She was teaching the kids on base. So we met her. She had a guide dog, and I think she helped us get an application and support to convince guide dogs for the blind that I was mature enough at the age of 14 to get a guide dog. And
Oh,
so I actually got a guide dog before I got a cane. The issue, though, isn't dog or cane
yeah.
in one sense. In another sense, it is, and I'll come back to it. The issue is, can a person travel? As a person aware of their surroundings, do they know how to get from place to place? The best way, the easiest, somewhat the easiest, but the basic way to do that is with a cane.
Hmm.
A cane is a device that you have that you will put out in front of you. And as you say, step forward with your left foot, you'll tap it to the right, and you step forward with your right foot, you'll tap it to the left. It will detect objects in front of you by contacting them. And
Yeah.
then you make decisions as to what to do. I want people to understand that doesn't mean that you're fumbling around or anything like that. It is a contact device that I and other people can use to know where, well, not know where we are, but be able to make decisions about how to travel. But
Hmm.
we need to know how to get around. We need to have the confidence to do it. We need to be aware of our surroundings, know when it's safe to cross the street, which we hear and learn by the way the traffic is going and other things like that. The difference between a cane and a dog is that a dog is even more demanding when it comes to knowing where you're going and how to get there,
Hmm.
because the dog's job is not to lead. And anyone who ever says, oh, like Roselle led me out of the World Trade Center, or your guide dog leads you, if I could tape their mouths shut, I would. Guide dogs do not lead, they guide. What does
Okay,
that
I
mean?
probably said that, so I'm going to zip
You
my mouth
didn't.
up right now.
No, you
Oh, I
didn't. You
didn't.
didn't today.
Oh,
But
okay. I didn't know
what's
if I did.
what's the difference? A dog that leads is knows where you want to go, or is deciding how you're going to go and how you're going to get there, and you're just following along. Blind
Yeah.
people don't work that way. We take the same initiatives as anyone else.
Hmm.
We take the same initiatives as those of you who are light dependent and require lights in order to get around. I don't, so I
I
think I'm
love how
more
you put that.
so I'm
We
more
are
normal than
light
you.
dependent.
You are
Yes.
light dependent. Thomas Edison invented the electric light bulb, and others invented the electric light bulb so that you all could get around in the dark. But make no mistake, I don't need that. The bottom line, though, is it doesn't matter really. We all use different cues to get the same information, but it's my job to get that information. The dog's job is to make sure that we walk safely. So we're
Okay.
walking along and the dog suddenly stops. I have to probe and look and determine why. Um, if I hear cars going across in front of me, probably the dog stopped at a curb.
Hmm.
If there's no sound in front of me and the dog stopped, I'm going to reach my hand out and maybe there's nothing there. Maybe there's a cliff, right? Or
Yeah.
maybe it's a flight of stairs and I'll reach out to the right and find a stair rail or whatever.
Uh-huh.
It is my job to know where to go and how to get there. And I learned to do all of that when I was growing up, even though I didn't learn to use a cane. But when I
Yeah.
went to get a guide dog, I had those skills. And so that was why Guide Dogs for the Blind accepted me. And it was another 4 years going from high school to college that I actually, for the first time, started using a cane and realized that, in fact, I could take anyone in the world and teach them how to use a white cane in 5 minutes.
Hmm.
Having said that, teaching someone to have the confidence to use a white cane and the awareness to use it takes months. And
Yeah.
that's the real issue. You learn to tie your shoes. You learn to walk around by looking at signs and so on. I learned to tie my shoes in a different way, but I learned how. I learned how to travel around using different cues to some degree than you do, but I still do it.
Hmm.
Blindness, as I tell people, blindness is not the problem I face. The problem I face is the misconceptions that people have about being blind and the poor attitudes that they have about what blind people can't do. I'm amazed at how many people think they're experts about blindness when they've never tried it.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, even me, daddy was blind, but I'm not blind. And, like you said about the lights, he would be in the basement, of course, with the lights off, and we'd go down and we'd want to turn the lights on. He's like, "You don't need the lights, I don't have them," and he would kind of force us to have to think differently. But you're so right that people too often treat blind people like you're totally helpless.
For many years, the Gallup polling organization, in doing surveys of people's fears, found that one of the top 5 fears that we faced was blindness. Not
Huh.
disabilities, but blindness, because people think you are worse off if you can't see than anything else. I
Yeah.
submit that's not true. But the issue is, it doesn't matter whether it's a disability or whatever. We all have gifts, we all have challenges, and we need to learn to recognize that we're all in this together. And the fact is that just because a person doesn't see doesn't mean they're in any way incapable. The problem is we face an unemployment rate among employable blind people in this country. The rate is about 65%. And it's not that people who are blind can't work, it's people think we can't work.
That's right.
I've gone on job interviews where I didn't say I was blind, so I got at least as far as being invited to an interview. If I
Uh-huh.
said I was blind in advance, I wouldn't even get an answer to a resume. But if I didn't say I'm blind, I may get an answer and they'll say, come in. I'll go in and the first thing is, oh my God, you're blind. How are you going to get to work? Excuse me, I just got here, right?
That's right. Yeah.
You looked at my resume, you liked my resume. What's the issue?
Hmm.
But that's not how people think.
Yeah.
Now there are some ways around some of that. We can get to that if you want, um, but the bottom line is people's misconceptions are the big thing that I face. And if people would start to recognize blindness isn't the problem, it's our own attitudes about blindness that create the real barriers that all of us face regarding people who happen to be blind, we'll start to make some real progress.
Yeah. I totally agree. And I'm going to tell you a funny story. I think it's funny. That when I was a kid, I was probably like in third grade, and my dad had a wood shop in our basement. He had a lathe, and this man came wanted to use it. So daddy invited him over to use the lathe. That man was so afraid that daddy was going to cut himself that he cut his own finger off because he was watching daddy while he was using the lathe. And my father never cut himself. So that's an example of just because we can see does not mean that we are seeing.
For many years, one of the best program for rehabilitation services for blind people in the country was the Iowa Commission for the Blind in the 60s into the 70s. The person who directed it was Kenneth Jernigan, who was also the president of the National Federation of the Blind. He was blind.
Hmm.
He hired blind people to teach. He hired blind people to be role models. And it wasn't totally all blind people in the commission, and it was a residential center, so people would literally go there for 9 months and learn how to walk, function, and use techniques to work as a blind person. One
Yeah.
of the things they had was a wood shop in the basement, and make no mistake, it had a lathe, it had joiners, it had bandsaws, it had a chainsaw, and every year they would actually, all the students each year would go out into the countryside to a forest and cut down trees for logs for the fireplaces in the commission. They would split the logs and do all the things that anyone else would do. And of course, what's the whole point? The point is for students to realize I don't need to be blind or worry about being blind to do this. And they
Yeah.
learn to do it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you can learn to do anything. Yeah, people who are blind or deaf or anything, you use different senses differently than us. And I know as a sighted person that we rely on our sight way too much, that we miss a lot because seeing we're just looking at what we're looking at. We're not really seeing things.
You do, but the other side of it is we don't get the option of not or of relying on eyesight too much. That's fine.
Yeah.
Some of us listen better than others. Some of us smell better than others. Have better noses or whatever. But the issue is that the the people who I think are most well oriented and adapted to their environment and their surroundings use more than one sense.
Yeah.
Um, Look, in the World Trade Center, I spent a lot of time when I first started working there and opening an office for Quantum Corporation. I actually did it earlier, but once I got into Tower One on the 78th floor in 2000, I started spending time at the beginning, in the middle, and the end of every day, one way or another, walking around the World Trade Center, just exploring it. Not
Mhm.
even using Roselle, my guide dog, because I wanted to explore it with a cane. Because with a cane, being a contact piece of technology, I would find things that the dog would just go around, like kiosks in the middle where people were selling things and other stuff. And
Yeah.
I would ask them, "What do you do here?" And I would find doorways and things that the dog would just pass. So the
Uh-huh.
cane, as I said, is the most basic tool. So I would walk around with the cane and truly learn the complex. But I did other things. I met with police people, with fire people, the Port Authority security people. I learned all about emergency evacuation procedures. I learned all that I could learn about anything that I might need to know,
Mhm.
because I knew that I was the leader of that office. I had people working for me.
Yeah.
And if we ever did have an emergency, and there had been one in 1993 where some terrorists tried to destroy the World Trade Center by blowing up a bomb in the parking lot, which didn't do a lot of damage. But I knew that if there were ever another emergency, I would be responsible for people. So I needed to know what to do. And
Mhm.
I knew, of course, you can't rely on signs. You guys do. You just look for the sign. Well, the sign says go this way. That works until you're in a smoke filled room, right?
Yeah.
And so, knowing that, I learned all of it so that I could take command if I needed to, in order to get people out. And of course, some people would say, well, how would you know what to do in an emergency? You can't see it. How do you know? How
That's
do you know
right.
what I can see and don't see? How
Mhm.
do you know what I know and don't know? Don't make those assumptions. Case in point, what I actually realized later I was doing by all of what I just described was I was developing a mindset that said, you know what to do in an emergency. So
Yeah.
on September 11th, for example, suddenly at 8:45 in the morning, we felt thud and kind of heard a muffled explosion. And as I'm tipping my hand toward the camera, that's what the tower did.
Mm.
Tall buildings like that are flexible. They're big springs, and the building began to tip and tip. We moved maybe about 20 feet.
Wow.
Then it came back.
Uh-huh.
And as soon as it got vertical, I had gone, by the way, I was standing up and I was standing and I went to my office door and stood in the doorway. You know, I learned early on living on the San Andreas Fault in California, building moves go to doorway. A lot of good that's going to do 78 floors up if the building falls, right? But still.
Yeah.
So I went back into my office. I met my guide dog, Roselle, coming out from under my desk. I took her leash. I told her to heel, to come around on my left side and sit, which she did. And then the building dropped straight down about 6 feet.
Oh my gosh.
Why did it drop? Because the expansion joints, remember I described it as a spring, the
Yeah.
expansion joints went back to their normal configuration. The building did what it was supposed to do.
That is
However,
so amazing.
however, as soon as all that happened, and I started hearing noises outside of our windows because we had a whole glass front. My colleague David Frank looked out the window and he said, "Oh my God, Mike, there's fire and smoke above us. There are millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside the window. We got to get out of here right now." By that time, for me, the mindset had kicked in,
Yeah.
and I was evaluating options. I was observing everything around me, and I said, "David, slow down. We'll get out." "No, no, no. We got to get out of here. The building's on fire. There are millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside the window. We can't stay here." Our guests began to scream, and they started moving toward our exits. And then they stopped when they heard me say, "Slow down, David." And I kept saying, "Slow down." And David said, "We got to get out of here." And then finally, he used the big line: "You don't understand. You can't see it,"
Oh my gosh.
which is typical. The
Yeah.
problem isn't what I didn't understand and couldn't see, it's what David wasn't seeing. Sitting next to me was a dog. And you know, dogs have heightened senses. And if there's something that they feel is something that can endanger them, they're going to be fearful of it. This dog was yawning and wagging her tail, going, "Who woke me up?"
Oh my
That
gosh.
that told me that whatever was going on wasn't such an imminent threat that we couldn't try to evacuate in an orderly way.
Yeah.
I finally got David to focus and said, "Get our guests to the stairs," which he did. I said, "Don't let them take elevators." Again, the things that I knew, because the elevators, if they're all in the center part, the central core of the building, and if there's fire and it got into the elevator shafts, anybody in the elevators would be burned.
Mm.
So I said, "Get them to the stairs, start them down, then come back and we'll sweep the offices and we'll leave," which is what we did.
Yeah.
Only after we started down, I began smelling an odor, and it took me a few floors to realize I was smelling the fumes from burning jet fuel because I did a
Ah,
lot of traveling through airports back then and now, and I knew what the odor was. And it just took me a while to realize that's what I was smelling in the World Trade Center. I told that to people around me. I'm smelling burning jet fuel. And they said, yeah, we're trying to figure it out. We didn't understand. We didn't know what it was.
uh-huh.
Now understand something. They didn't know what it was. People always say to me, well, of course you didn't know what happened because you couldn't see it. Now, the last time I checked, we don't know or have the ability easily to see through concrete and tile floors up 15, 18 floors or whatever on through walls to go from the south side to the north side of the building. In other words, x-ray vision doesn't really exist.
Um,
Nobody knew where we were, what was going on.
yeah.
None of us knew. So the bottom line is we went down, but the mindset for me had kicked in and I knew what to do. And so my job was to keep people focused. I also knew that Roselle could become afraid if she sensed enough fear and people acted afraid around her. So I was constantly telling her, good girl, Roselle, what a good
Oh,
dog. Keep going, good dog, because I needed her to understand we were okay. And so she kept focused. I kept focused. So we worked together as the team that we are. When you get a guide dog, you're really building a team.
mhm.
We each have a job to do. The dog's job, as I said, is to keep us walking safely. It's my job to know where to go and giving her directions every step of the way. With the bottom of a flight of stairs, left, Roselle, left, good girl, go down the next set of stairs. The reality is, it's not about blindness. It's about using your gifts, and it's not about eyesight. It's using all of your gifts. And you're right, too many people just rely on eyesight,
Mhm.
which is such a dangerous thing because you don't recognize all the other potentials that are available to you if you'll
Yeah.
but learn them.
You
And
know, oh,
one of the
sorry, go
things that
ahead.
I've done is talked about that a lot over the last, I know we're going to get to this more, but talked about that a lot over the last 21 years, but I've never taught other people how to deal with overcoming or not allowing themselves to be blinded by fear. And so
Mhm.
we're writing a new book about that, and we're starting a coaching program to teach people how to face fear, how to use it as a powerful tool, and not let it overwhelm you so you can't make decisions.
I'm really excited about that book. It's gonna help so many people, but I'm excited about it for myself too because it's kind of human nature that when something happens, we go into panic mode, and when we go into panic mode, we basically freeze, and we're not making any decisions, or if we do, we're not making logical ones. So I'm so glad that you're writing that.
If people want to get a taste of it, you can go to www.blindedbyfear.net. And
Okay.
there is a place where you can download, no charge, a brief ebook about overcoming and not allowing yourself to be blinded by fear. So you can go get that. And that's going to be kind of the start of the basic premises of the book.
Okay, that's awesome. I'll add it to the show notes. And you're also going to be coaching people on how to overcome fear,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
So
basically
we're
a
excited by
life
that.
coach. Yeah, and that applies to everything in your life. Speaking of Roselle, I was going to say earlier that having Roselle there helped everybody, but then it goes back even further because you yourself had already explored the entire building. You had bothered to educate yourself and learn all these things. And 99.9% of people just don't even bother to try to learn. And I'm throwing myself in there too, because I don't go explore everything. It's just kind of our human nature to assume that we'll figure it out. So that is so cool that the preparation that you had done for yourself, knowing that you would need to know these things if and when the time came, everybody else benefited from it.
Well, what a number of people have told me since, and I've met a number of people who said that we came into the stairwell as you were passing by, like some people on the 55th floor. They said you were passing by and you were speaking very calmly to your dog. Your dog was just focused and wagging her tail and going down the stairs. And we figured, if you can be this focused and not be afraid, then we're going to follow you down the stairs, and which is
That,
exactly what
oh,
people did.
it brings tears to my eyes because just being able to remain calm in any situation makes such a difference in the outcome, but especially when you're dealing with a huge emergency like that.
We get so overwhelmed by fear. We allow ourselves to get overwhelmed by fear. I mean, marketing is using fear on a regular basis.
Yeah.
You better go get your car registered for our warranty because you want to do it before your engine light goes on, or then you're going to be way too late. And any number of different things. The politicians use fear all the time, and we're allowing ourselves to be overwhelmed by that rather than stepping back and saying, all right, I heard what this guy said or that woman said. Is that real? Not
Yeah.
just accepting it, but looking at it, maybe exploring it, talking to others. Are those facts really true? We're dealing with a situation out in California right now. There are two propositions on the ballot dealing with online gaming, and the main one is being put out by the Gaming Commission, and it says that um, they're they want to govern online betting and all that stuff, and money's going to go to the homeless and to the Indian tribes, especially the ones that don't have their own casinos and so on, the disadvantaged tribes.
Hmm.
What if you read the proposition, you find is that like 90% of all the money goes to the gaming people.
Oh, yeah.
10% goes to the state, and that 10% gets split up between the Indian tribes in California,
Uh-huh.
the homeless, whatever that may mean, and whatever else the state has. So let's say they have a $10 billion profit. So 90% of it goes to the gaming people, which leaves $1 billion. And if 15% of it goes to Indian tribes, there's $150 million. That's not a whole lot of money, folks.
Yeah.
The reality is, but they warp, they distort. Politicians do that so often rather than really trying to connect with people and helping people make sensible choices. Some of them don't want to do that because they in their hearts know that what they're doing is wrong. They
Yeah.
know that they're not conveying the real truth, but for them it's all about power. And
Mhm.
we've got to get away from that. And I'm not going to take sides in the political wars, but I'm saying that not one single voter should just accept what anyone says. Go study it and analyze it and learn about it for yourself and become more intelligent. That way you won't be afraid,
Mhm.
because you realistically, many people are. And that way you'll really be able to make intelligent decisions. And if everyone really studied it, you could have more intelligent conversations. There's nothing wrong with disagreement, but
Yeah.
all too often we're seeing people who absolutely are intolerant about people disagreeing with them.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with doing that, but come at it from knowing what you're talking about, not just listening to what one or a few people say.
Right. And that's how we all learn. First, we learn because, we're exploring and discovering on our own, educating ourselves. But then when we talk to people who have other viewpoints, we're learning from them. And, it's just like something that people can relate to. It's like if you live in one town and you've never been anywhere else, this is all you know. When you travel and you meet people from different places, you hear different accents, even if it's the same language. So the more you expand your horizons, the more that you learn, the more educated you are. And as you said, not taking any sides because it's there's enough to throw around for everybody, but it's just that we as humans need to take responsibility for ourselves and our own decisions.
Make no mistake, there are blind people who will tell you that everything I'm saying is a lot of bunk,
Oh,
that
yeah.
blind people really can't. And you can just buy into that because that's the typical misconception that unfortunately they've bought into.
Yeah.
Or you can think about it a little bit more. Really? Why can't blind people use the internet?
Uh-huh.
Why is it that blind people can't do a lot of the things that we think they can't do, or why is it that they can? The fact is that just because I may use different technologies and a different technique to do something, it doesn't mean that I can't do it. But why do we just buy into that theory? It's
Mhm.
because we're locked into one way of thinking and we don't explore the world around us.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to just accept what we're told or what we're read than it is to take responsibility and learn more.
Right.
I want to talk about the fact that you were in technology sales for decades, right?
Yep. I
A lot of people would probably be like, "Oh my God, a blind person can be in sales for technology," you know?
my first job out of college was working with the National Federation of the Blind, which is the largest organization of blind consumers. And
Mhm.
they had been approached by Dr. Ray Kurzweil, the guy some people have probably heard of because he invented this concept of the singularity, but he is also the person who introduced omnifont optical character recognition to the world. That is the ability for a computer to look at a printed page or a typed page or a page with a combination of different type styles and recognize the characters and do something with them.
Mhm.
And the something with them that he first decided to do was to make a machine that would read print out loud. He tried to get funding and couldn't get funding, and he eventually went to the National Federation of the Blind and convinced us to, and I wasn't the person at first, but convinced us to look at his machine. And we said, yeah, we'll do it if it reads what we bring it, then we'll be interested. Otherwise,
Mhm.
it's a lot of hogwash, But it read the stuff that the people brought. So we developed a program to buy at a very expensive price deliberately 5 prototype machines to give him the funding to finish the project. And we took those machines and put them around the country. And literally, I lived in hotels out of suitcases for 18 months,
Mhm.
going from place to place, setting up machines, showing people how to use them, training people who would then train others, setting up the criteria for testing. And at the end of 18 months, we wrote a series of recommendations that needed to go into the final machine. And then I was hired to go to work for Kurzweil. But after being there for about 8 months, I was called into the office of the vice president of marketing, who said, we're laying you off. And I had been doing the same thing for Kurzweil that I'd been doing for the Federation. And
Uh-huh.
he said, we're laying you off. And I said, why? He said, oh, make no mistake, you're not doing bad work or anything like that. But we behaved like so many startup engineering companies. We've hired too many people who are not revenue producers, and you're not a revenue producer. So we've got to let you go. And I said, well, that's no fun. Um, and he said, well, I'm sorry, we got to do that. And then he paused and he said, unless you'll go into sales. But we don't want you to sell the reading machine for the blind. We have a new commercial system and we want you to sell that, which I realized was quite a compliment because it was extremely visually oriented, which is fine.
Yeah.
Um, and so, as I love to tell people, in a nanosecond, I decided to lower my standards and go into sales. And they said, we'll teach you how to sell. We're going to send you to a Dale Carnegie sales course and so on. And in that course, I learned a lot of concepts about selling, what selling was truly about. But there were a couple of things that I really came away with. And the most important one of them is something that I have taught to every salesperson I have ever hired. And I say it to every blind person who I ever talk with about job interviews. And I would say it to any of your people who are listening and watching who want to disrupt their now. The concept is turn perceived liabilities into assets. What
Yes.
is blindness? Blindness
Uh-huh.
is a perceived liability. So I went to work for Kurzweil and I did that for a while. And then I eventually was laid off when Xerox bought the company and they phased all of us out and I couldn't find a job. So I started my own company and did that for about 4 years. And then I decided to go back in the workforce. And it was now 1989, and my wife and I found a great ad in a newspaper for a job that looked like it would be perfect. So the only question was, do I say I'm blind in the cover letter or not? Because that's the usual debate. I
Yeah.
was locked into that. Do I say I'm blind or I'm not? And Karen, my wife, said, as wives can do, you're a dummy. And I said, what do you mean? She said, what's the most important thing you learned from the Dale Carnegie sales course? And I said, well, I can think of several. Which one are you thinking of? And she quoted that turn perceived liabilities into assets. And over my head, the little light bulb went off and I wrote a cover letter. And here are the last two paragraphs of the cover letter, basically, as I remember them. The most important thing that you need to know about me when you're considering me for this job is that I happen to be blind. As a blind person, I've had to sell all my life. I've had to sell to convince people to let me buy a home. This was prior to the ADA. I've had
Yeah.
to sell to convince people to let me take my guide dog on an airplane, or to rent an apartment, or to even to go in a grocery store, or to look for a job. So when you're hiring someone, do you want to hire someone who just comes in for 8 or 10 hours a day? Would you rather hire somebody who comes in and truly understands sales for the science and art that it is, and is selling 24 hours a day as a way of life?
Ah,
And that's the letter that I sent to this company. And 2 weeks later, I was called in for an interview. Turn perceived liabilities into assets. Blindness isn't the problem.
okay.
All too often, our thought patterns and our being locked into something are really the issues that we need to face. But the bottom line is that that most liabilities are perceived. They're not necessarily true. Oh, your product is too expensive. Tell
Yeah.
me more about that. Well, it's going to be $200,000 to buy this tape library, which is what I sold for Quantum Corporation in the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
Really? $200,000? Why is that too expensive? Well, that's just a lot of money to back up data. How much do you lose every second if your system goes down and you can't recover your files? And that's
Yeah.
the first thing that stops most people.
Hmm.
Um, there are all, and the issue is, I've also found situations where those arguments are great, but the particular configuration didn't lend itself to our product. And I would then, as something else I learned in the Dale Carnegie course, tell people our product won't work and here's why. But here's the product that will. Miracle on 34th Street, right? Kris Kringle will tell you where to go buy the toy. But the bottom line is, here's why that product will work. I've done that on a number of occasions, and invariably, here's what happens. They'll go off and buy that product, but sometime later, the main time I'm thinking of was like we had a, $1 million sale, and our product wouldn't do it. And I told them, and they went off and bought the product that would. 2 weeks later, I got another call from the company, and they said, we remember everything that you taught us and that you said. We have another project. It absolutely matches everything that you've told us about what your product can do. Just tell us how much it is and we'll order it today. And it was a
Awesome.
multi-million-dollar sale, because sales is really about trust.
Yeah.
Sales is all about credibility. And you shouldn't just force somebody or just spend all day convincing somebody to buy your product, especially if it's not the right thing.
Hmm.
And I can take that to politics, but we won't go there, at the moment. But it's the same concept, right?
Yeah.
People should be dealing with what's truly going to make life better and show that it's better. Don't
Uh-huh.
just go off and try to force somebody to your way of thinking. That's what the thugs did on September 11th, and look where it got them.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I doubt it got them each 72 virgins up in heaven. I don't think so.
Yeah, I doubt that too. That is such a great lesson, though, because, and especially entrepreneurs, small business owners, and I'm guilty of this myself. I'm a lot better at marketing for and selling people for other people than I am myself, because we're too close to our own things and can't see the forest for the trees or whatever. But that's such a great point about admitting, or whatever you want to call it, this is not the right thing, and then giving them a suggestion that is actually a competitor, because you are building their trust, and then they know you're not just telling them what you think they want to hear to buy your product.
But it's also important to say why you think that the other product is a better solution,
Yes.
and opening up discussions. The best salesperson I ever hired, when he came in for his interview, chatted with me about this and that and all the things that you ask in an interview. And then I asked him the same question I ask everyone. So tell me more about what you're going to be selling for us. And the usual answer that people give, oh, we're going to sell your tape libraries, and they do this and that and the other stuff. Kevin's response was, Only thing I can really sell is myself and my word, and you back me up.
Oh,
Products are stuff. The
yeah.
only thing I really have to sell is me. And I
Hmm.
will succeed if I am able to sell me and develop trust. And that's what it's, and he's absolutely right. That is absolutely the correct answer. But you
Yeah.
also need to not only say that with conviction, but back it up. And he
Uh-huh.
was able to do that.
Yeah.
And so he got hired and he was the best sales guy I ever hired. We stay in touch.
That's awesome. So you started out in sales and then you ended up running an entire sales team.
Well, on a number of occasions, yeah. And then I
Uh-huh.
left after September 11th. I started my own company. Well, I went to work at Guide Dogs for the Blind to be their spokesperson, but I had also started getting speaking requests. And I still do today, although the pandemic has seen some of that slow down. But I speak for a living in
Yeah.
addition to working for Accessibility. So I will say to all of you listening, if you need a speaker to talk to your company to motivate you, but also to talk about trust and teamwork, dealing with making choices and ethics and so on, that is what I do. And
Yeah.
I'm glad to explore it. And people can find us at michaelhingson.com. And they can learn about it. But for me, I did that for 8 years at Guide Dogs for the Blind. I spoke, I traveled, but I also was the spokesperson for Guide Dogs. Actually, I
Hmm.
said 8 years. It's only was about 6.5. Um, and then a new CEO joined who was very strange in a lot of ways. And one of the things she said is that nobody's interested in September 11th anymore, so we're phasing out your job.
Oh
and
my
um,
God.
and she was really good. She lasted at least 18 months or no more than 18 months
Jeez.
because she so demoralized the school that the training department actually started working toward organizing a union for guide dog trainers.
Oh my gosh.
So the board invited her to go away, but by that time I was gone and I had started my own company, and the Michael Hingson Group Inc. has been around
Uh-huh.
ever since.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought up the speaking thing because the topics that you speak on are so helpful to companies, to individuals, to everybody. So let's talk a little bit about some of the topics that you speak on.
Well, one of my favorites is Turning the Table on Terrorism, and it's about dealing with things like what happened on September 11th and how to focus, and that you can focus and you don't have to let it overwhelm you. What my absolute favorite talk is one called Moving from Diversity to Inclusion. And what I mean by that is if you talk about diversity in the world today, you hear about sexual orientation, gender, and so on, but you don't hear about disabilities.
Yeah,
We're left out of that.
that's right.
So I talk about inclusion, saying if you're going to talk about being inclusive, you can't unless you're including disabilities. You either are inclusive or you're not. There's no middle
Hmm.
ground.
Yeah.
And so moving from diversity to inclusion is a favorite topic of mine. Labrador lessons is another one where we talk about, again, the lessons to be learned about trust and teamwork and how to create good teams and so on from September 11th. And what I've learned from now working with 8 guide dogs all together.
Oh,
I have one that's called Making Choices, and um, that in reality you need to not think so much outside the box, but learn how to use your inner toolbox, and we talk about that. And another one that I like is Ethics, the Real Bottom Line, talking
uh,
about making ethical decisions and so on, and the importance of it and the value of it, and how that will enhance you and everything that you do and enhance your relationships with the people around you.
yeah. Those are all great topics. And you speak all over the world, right? Or
Yes.
maybe not as much now because of COVID and the travel restrictions. But that's one thing that to me is so inspiring because you disrupted your now. After 9/11, you realized that there was this need out there and you stepped up and created an entire new career for yourself and have helped so many other people because you did disrupt your now.
Well, you think about it. What happened after September 11th is the media heard about my story, and I started getting a lot of requests for interviews. And my wife and I talked about it, and I finally said, if it's going to help people move on from September 11th, if it will teach people the lessons they should learn or start to get people thinking about the lessons they should learn, if it'll teach people about guide dogs and what blindness is really about, then it's worth doing. And then people started calling and saying, would you come and talk with us? And I realized how much more emotionally rewarding, but all around rewarding
Yeah.
it would be to do that than selling computer hardware, that it was absolutely something to do. But it was a choice. Also, for me, picking on the media is so much fun for everyone. But for me, one of the things that I will say is that because I was asked almost any question that you can imagine by one or more people from the media over many months, and still, I was forced to talk about that stuff. And I put myself in that position. That helped me move on from September 11th and become more articulate about it.
Oh, yeah. That's a really good point. For being forced to address questions that you may would rather not even think about, I guess.
Yeah, and learning that, hey, you open yourself up for that, so you need to answer those questions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the best questions, the absolute best questions come from kids. I was
Yeah.
I was speaking in an elementary school, and this one third grader got up when we opened it up for questions, and the teachers said, "You can't talk to these kids very long. You won't keep their attention."
Oh.
I talked for about 35 minutes before we opened it up because I talked about the guide dogs and all sorts of, and they just sat there enraptured when
Um,
I knew that would happen. But
yeah.
anyway, I opened it up to questions, and this one kid gets up. I don't know if he was being a smart aleck or whether he was really interested. I don't know why, but I think so. Who knows? Anyway, his question was, "How do blind people have sex?" My favorite question. And the answer is the
Just like
same way,
everybody else.
just like everyone else. And if you want to know more, go ask your parents.
That is so funny. I love it.
That was my favorite question. But, I believe that if I can help people understand more about themselves, and in today, whether it's dealing with COVID, whether it's dealing with all the other fearful things that we face, if I can help people more learn to deal with not allowing themselves to be blinded by fear, if I can help them to recognize that they can do things like at the end of each day, look at what happened today, analyze it. What could you have done differently? And take the time to do that. Take the time absolutely volitionally to do that. You will be much better for it. And there are a lot of other kinds of techniques like that, the whole idea of meditation and so on, that can
Yeah.
help us slow down. But the fact of the matter is, we don't have to allow ourselves to be overwhelmed and just blinded or paralyzed by the things that we're afraid of. It doesn't mean that they're not there. It doesn't mean that in walking down the stairs, the building couldn't have suddenly collapsed.
Yeah.
But the other side of it, and one of the other things that I learned from September 11th is, don't worry about what you can't control. Focus on the
Yes.
things that you can. The rest will take care of itself. If you spend all day worrying about all the stuff that you don't have control over, then you're going to drive yourself crazy.
Yeah. I was just telling somebody that the other day. Stop worrying about what you can't control. And the other thing I told them was stop thinking about shoulda, woulda, coulda, because
Yeah,
it's already gone. You cannot change the past. Learn from it and move on. But in a way, it's a lot easier to just obsess about those things than it is to actually learn and move on and make changes.
it's easier until you learn that it's really easier not to worry about it if you develop the mindset.
Yeah,
It's a
true.
lot easier not to worry about the things that you can't control if you teach yourself to do that. But that's not typically what we do, and that's the problem. Is that we do the coulda, shoulda, woulda, and we do
Uh,
the, well, we got to worry about this, we got to worry about that. You don't have any control over that,
yeah.
and so it's important to learn that. One of the biggest things that I think we face, I still hear it all the time today. I especially heard it after September 11th, and it's just as much of a problem now as it was then, is we got to get back to normal.
Uh,
Normal will
yeah.
never be the same again.
Yes.
With COVID, normal will never be the same again. Yeah, there are things we want to travel, we want to do stuff, but we may not be able to do it exactly the same way depending on how much control we truly get in immunizations over the
Mhm.
COVID virus. It doesn't mean that we can't travel, But there are things that if we truly sit back and analyze and see what works, we will recognize if we incorporate some of those techniques, we can more safely travel around.
Yeah.
Normal is never going to be the same again. And people kept saying it after September 11th. And it took me a while to realize why I hated that statement so much. But it was because I realized if we let things get back to normal prior to 9/11, to September 11th, same thing's going to happen again.
Yes. And
Normal would
who's to
never
say
be the
what's
same again.
normal? But also analyze, adapt, and overcome. Learn from everything that we go through, good and bad, and then move on and try to figure out, you know, what we can do to improve things going forward. But
Right.
again, a lot of what what I might say is normal or might wish is normal might not be for you. So normal is really a subjective word.
It is, but we can all learn to live together and work
Yeah.
together in our own normals. Gandhi was right when he talks about being the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah.
We have to live our own lives and live them as productively as we can. But
Hmm.
we have to really think about that and make intelligent decisions. And again, not let anyone drive us, not let anyone teach us to not think for ourselves, to
Yeah.
not have conversations. And that's the problem that all too often, too many people say, well, it's just easier to follow what this person is saying. Well,
Yeah.
it's easier if you allow it to be. If you think about it and you really study it, you're going to learn over time that it's easier to really analyze and then make intelligent decisions,
Yeah.
which isn't to say that what people are saying to you might be wrong or right. It may very well be right. But even with the most correct person in the world, think about it for yourself.
Hmm.
Make your own decision. Don't let anyone make it for you. Be the driver, not the passenger.
Yeah. I love that, Michael. I want to go back to something because you mentioned Accessibility a little bit earlier, and
Uh-huh.
probably most people are not familiar with Accessibility is a web accessibility tool. So tell them a little bit about that. And actually, before you do, I want to tell the audience that's how we met is through Accessibility, and Accessibility was one of the sponsors on our NASCAR car last year when we had the first Braille paint scheme in NASCAR. And so we were so proud to have y'all in the car, and we were launching a blind owned business, first blind owned sponsor in NASCAR that we know of, and the first Braille paint scheme. And by the way, Mike, I have a really big idea that I really want to do for the Braille paint scheme that I'm still looking for somebody. So
We should talk
I
about
want
it
the
then.
whole car to be Braille.
There you
But
go.
anyway, so yeah, tell them about Accessibility because whether they use Accessibility or something else, accessibility is what every company needs to be striving for everybody. Accessibility for everyone.
So here's the deal. Gosh, sound like Joe Biden. Um, so the reality is that making your business inclusive should truly be what you want to do because it's part of the cost of doing business. Most companies buy these nice coffee machines so that people can get a good cup of coffee or tea or whatever, and they got these fancy touch screens and all that, which are not necessarily usable by some of us. They companies provide electric lights so you can get around and see. They provide you with computers and monitors. They may provide you with a gym. They may provide you with any number of different things. The resistance comes when it suddenly is a time that a blind person comes and says, I need the software. When you hire me, I might need to get a piece of software that will allow me to hear what's coming across the computer screen or use some other visual interpretive services like a company called Ira and so on. Oh my gosh, we can't do that. That's too expensive. Bunk. It's
Yeah,
part of the cost of doing business to make your company available to everyone.
right.
And what other people, what a lot of these people who say those things don't understand is, and there's a lot of proof for this, if you truly make your company inclusive, you will, in fact, um, gain employees who are going to be much more loyal to you because we know how hard it is for us to get a job and break through that 65% unemployment barrier.
Yeah.
So, do you want employees who are going to be dedicated to you and stay with you? Don't you want to do what you can? Anyway, in 2015, three guys in Israel formed a company to make websites. And they started creating websites right and left. They were all around 25 and they were really good software engineers and marketers and all that. And in 2017, Israel passed a law that says all websites must be accessible. So there. And these guys went, oh my gosh, how are we going to make our websites accessible? How are we going to do that in a reasonable time? They created an artificial intelligence system to help that process. And what the system would do if you subscribe to Accessibility or if they put it on your site, which was a couple of lines of Java code, their little artificial intelligent widget that sits up in the cloud would come and analyze your site and see what is accessible, what is properly described, and what's not.
Mhm.
Typically, the way websites are made accessible is somebody has to go in and manually code them. And the manual coders will tell you that's the only way to make a website accessible. You got to go in and do the stuff. Of course, the other thing is it's not just doing it, it's keeping it accessible as you make changes in your website, because any decent website is going to be dynamic and change.
Yeah.
Anyway, Accessibility people created this company and this widget that comes and looks at your website and it says, so this is what's accessible, this is what's not accessible. And because you put some Java code on your site, it makes a picture, or what's called, some people call an overlay of your site. When a person, let's say a blind person, then comes to your website, you have not changed the coding other than putting those couple lines of Java code, but Accessibility has created a picture.
Mhm.
It's created a complete analysis and essentially representation of your website, including all of the access codes that it can put in. And when you, as a blind person, come to a website using Accessibility, the first thing you hear is put your website in a screen reader mode, or put your browser in a screen reader mode. And you push the little button that says actually put your browser in a screen reader mode button.
Mhm.
And when you push that button, Accessibility downloads all of the accessibility codes that it has analyzed and figures out will make your website more usable. And so your browser thinks that the website is totally, well, let me not say totally, is accessible. It is more
Mhm.
accessible because the codes are in the browser.
Yeah.
So it's seeing them. And
Uh-huh.
so you as a user see a much more usable website.
Yeah.
Accessibility has done that for a variety of disabilities. So, for example, if you're a person with epilepsy, you don't want to go to a website that has a lot of blinking elements.
Mhm.
Instead, you can activate a profile that will stop the elements from blinking and draw your attention to what would normally blink with other means. But the point is, Accessibility does all of this, and it's an inexpensive process. It only costs a few $100s a year unless you've got a very complicated or huge website with thousands of pages and so on.
Mhm.
But um, it doesn't do everything that needs to be done. So, for example, on my website, there's a picture of me and Roselle. And when Accessibility saw that picture, it said, in doing its best to try to analyze it, it said, and it plugs in this description that says, man in black suit, actually, I guess it's man in black jacket, hugging yellow Labrador retriever,
Mhm.
which is incredible in of itself that it's that sophisticated enough to do it.
Yeah.
But that's not what I wanted to say. I wanted to say what we then inserted manual code for it to say, Mike hugging Roselle.
Yeah.
And there are other things that the widget won't do, dealing with complicated bar graphs and so on. So Accessibility has expanded what it does, not only to use the widget, but it also has a department that will help in doing manual remediations and has a whole system called Access Flow. So
Oh.
people can go to accessibe.com. They can run a report to see how accessible their website is, and then they can buy Accessibility. If you've got under 1,000 pages, I think it's like $490 a year.
Mhm.
But then they can also um, hire the process to do the rest of it with Access Flow, or they can go to people like you, Lisa,
Yeah.
who know how to do that. But the point is that there are ways to augment what the widget does. But the widget, even for programmers,
Yeah.
is such a boon, because if you let Accessibility do what it can do, all you have to worry about is the stuff that the widget doesn't know how to do.
Yeah.
In 1985, I mentioned earlier, I started a company which was to sell computer aided design systems to architects. I didn't need to work the system. What I needed to know was how to work the system so I could describe it.
Hmm.
And what I did was to learn the system and hold on one sec.
Okay.
And my little Amazon Echo decided to say something, and I was afraid it was going to try to buy something because it said,
Oh.
"Do you want me to want to buy this?"
Yeah,
I
you don't want a whole
apologize,
bunch of
everyone.
boxes turning up in your house.
Sorry, everybody. Anyway, I don't even know why it said it because I didn't say its name. But anyway, I guess I did. I said computer, and that's what this one is named.
Uh,
Anyway, so I started this company, and architects, when we approached them, said, "But I don't want to do that because I'm making my money by spending all my time doing these drawings, taking months and getting it right and all that. And how am I going to make money if I use these computer systems that will do it in a couple of weeks or a couple of days?" And my response is, why should it be any different?
yeah.
You're charging for your expertise. Why
Uh-huh.
charge for the time? Charge for your expertise. And the people who caught on to that bought the system and became much more productive, still charged the prices that they wanted to charge, and they in turn got more jobs. Same thing with Accessibee and programmers. Why
Mhm.
not use Accessibee to let it do what it can do, and you can finish the job and then go find other work to do? But remember, part of the issue with Accessibee and why it's such a valuable tool is it's scalable. It's all up in the cloud. So whenever someone finds something that Accessibee doesn't do or doesn't do well, and the people at the company fix that,
Yeah.
that fix goes for the over 150,000 people who use Accessibee today. So it's not just done on one site, whereas what coders do can only work on one site at a time.
Yeah.
Why not view it as an asset and an ally? But unfortunately, a lot of people, once again, are myopic in the way they view it. But the fact
Yeah.
is, Accessibee does make life a whole lot more productive across the board. And you know that very well because you have a company that does those things and uses
Yeah.
Accessibee.
Let it do the heavy lifting. And like you mentioned earlier, every time you add something to your site or change something, whoever's doing it, if you're not using Accessibee or some other accessibility plugin, if you're not using it, then somebody like me or an expert has to come in and make sure that whoever added this new content hasn't broken whatever or hasn't done something, hasn't, they don't know how to add the stuff to make it accessible.
Or it
So,
costs you a lot to do. And that's
yeah,
the issue is that most over 98% of all websites are not accessible or they don't
yeah.
have accessibility tools built into them.
Hmm.
And that's really the problem. And that gap grows wider. Accessibee's goal is to make the entire internet inclusive by 2025, and it can do it because of the scalable solutions that it provides.
Yeah,
Yes, the stuff that has to be manually coded is manually coded, but Accessibee's artificial intelligence widget can do a lot of the heavy lifting, as you put it, right
hmm,
off the bat. And it doesn't take much to make it happen.
yeah. Yeah, I love it, and great bunch of guys that started it, and your position there is chief vision officer, right?
I'm the chief vision officer, so I get to do the things that we're doing, and I help to create some of the vision and teach people internally about disabilities. And because of Accessibee, at their request, we started the podcast, Unstoppable Mindset, last
Yeah.
September. So it started a year ago Saturday,
Oh,
this
wow.
past Saturday.
Uh-huh.
And we're putting episode 58 up because we've gotten so much interest that we're actually going to 2 episodes a week now. And we're doing it on YouTube as well as the regular podcast systems. So people
Nice.
can search Unstoppable Mindset. And we hope that they will. If they want to come on the podcast, love to talk with you about it because the purpose of the podcast is to inspire, to teach people that you can be more unstoppable than you thought you could, and that you
Yeah.
probably think you can. And we're having a lot of fun with it. Lisa was on one of our early podcasts. And again, I thank you for that. And so out of that came us being here today. But
Yeah.
people can learn about Unstoppable Mindset and hope that they will. It's available wherever you get podcasts. And again, they can go to michaelhingson.com/podcast as well, but find it wherever you find podcasts. And we'd love to have you join us. And if you want to be a guest, love to have that as well.
Yeah, y'all have some great episodes on there. I follow it so I listen to it regularly, and had a lot of fun as a guest on there. So anybody out there that, if you're looking for a fun person to talk with on a podcast, Michael's a great host and great conversationalist.
It's fun. We enjoy it. And of course, again, as we talked about speaking, I'd love to explore that with anyone. And
Yeah.
we haven't talked about Thunderdog, of course, which is the book
Yes,
that we
tell
wrote
them
about.
about Yeah, tell us
S-
about Thunderdog.
So Thunderdog is a book I wrote. It's called Thunderdog: The Story of a Blind Man, His Guide Dog, and the Triumph of Trust. And it's a story about my life. We use the World Trade Center terrorist attacks as kind of a backdrop. Every chapter starts with something from that day, and then we go back in my life to things I learned that helped me in dealing with that, and then we end each chapter coming back to that day, and then go on to the next chapter. In its first week out, it was a #1 New York Times bestseller, and that was in 2011. It was published in August of 2011. It's still out there. You can get Thunderdog anywhere you can get books, audiobook, large print books. You can get it, and any bookstore can order it for you as well. It's available in a variety of different languages. And we also wrote Running with Roselle, which is more intended for children, to teach them about a blind child growing up and a guide dog growing up and how we met. But very frankly, more adults buy it than kids. And it's available on Amazon. We self-publish it, but through Amazon, it's available wherever you can get books. It's available for order. But I
Okay.
hope people will get Thunderdog, however you want to read it, because it will teach you more than I could ever say in the brief time that we have about blindness. And I hope, again, inspire you and teach you lessons that you should learn about blindness and the World Trade Center. And you'll see why we can help you in coming to speak to your organization.
Yes, please do buy it, y'all. It's great. And I wanted to tell you, Michael, I love what you're doing because in helping people help themselves, you're also creating so much awareness about blindness and other disabilities. And so you're helping educate people on how to help themselves, but at the same time, you're educating them and bringing about awareness of things that they probably never even thought of. A lot of people have never even been around a blind person, but they also, if they're thinking about accessibility, they may only think about somebody being blind or somebody being in a wheelchair. They may not think about, like you said, epilepsy and different things like that. So I love the multiple layers of what you're doing because people learn in so many different ways from what
Well,
you're doing.
and I recognize that the reason that people have the attitudes primarily that they do is not that they're mostly negative. It's more no one's educated them.
Yeah.
We're as a collective group, persons with disabilities, we represent about 25% of our population. But if you deal with the number of blind people, it's a whole lot smaller than that. And so the fact is, though, that we should recognize that we're not all the same and we all have different gifts. And one set of gifts doesn't make somebody less than you or you more than they. And hopefully we can work to teach people more about what accessibility and um, inclusion is really all about. We're
Yeah.
all part of the same world. We're all born under the same God's grace, whatever religion we have,
Uh-huh.
and whether we're a person with a so-called disability or not. And I submit, as we talked a little bit about earlier, everyone has a disability. For most of you, it's light dependence.
Yes.
And you're not going to change that. That's
Mhm.
okay, though. But there are a
Yeah.
whole lot more of you than there are of me. And so I understand why electric lights came along long before screen readers and other things that I might use, or even, well, not long before Braille, but Braille became very usable. But now people are saying, well, blind people don't need to use Braille because you can get recorded books and so on.
Yeah.
Really? Really? Well, if you say that, why is it that we still teach sighted kids to read print? Why don't we just let them
Uh-huh.
watch pictures and cartoons on television?
Exactly.
Blind people need Braille.
Yeah.
And I recognize people who become blind later in life aren't going to learn Braille like people who are blind from birth or earlier become blind. But the reality is, Braille is the only true means of reading and writing available to me. And
Yeah.
good Braille readers will read faster than most print readers any day of the week.
Hmm. Yeah. And I always say, look, well, no matter what it is, whether it's writing or anything, if we have an electromagnetic pulse or something like that and everything digital is wiped out, even if it's just for a little while, we have to be able to read and write. And so we can't just be totally dependent on digital stuff. Um,
So we should still all own typewriters. But yeah,
yeah. Well, I was going to say an example, a personal example from my side of how we can be so focused, how we're so used to what we're used to that we don't think about other people. You know, growing up with Daddy being blind, we didn't think about him being blind because he was just Daddy. And so when I was in high school, I had this girl, she's my best friend. We became best friends then. She'd been coming to our house for like 2 months, and I didn't tell her that he was blind. And she couldn't tell because he was in our house and he's just walking around. And, you know, when he talked to her, he looked at her and stuff. And we were at school and somebody said something about Lisa's father's blind. She goes, "No, he's not." I said, "Yeah, he is." But that's an example of I didn't even think to tell her because I was so used to him being blind. So that's kind of the flip side of it, that we're so used to whatever we're around that we don't think about it from the angle of other people. And we really do need to be more cognizant about thinking about other people.
and why should we worry about whether a person's blind or a different color than we? I
Yeah.
learned over the weekend, I think it was, or last week, Bernard Shaw, the CNN reporter or host for many years,
Uh-huh.
who passed away last week. I didn't know he was African American, and I don't care.
Yeah.
But he was,
Uh-huh.
and I didn't know it until somebody said it last week. But you know what? So what?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, I
Frankly,
said at the
I've
time,
never paid attention to colors myself.
yeah,
So
yeah. I said at the time, I'm like, well, do y'all tell people what color your parents' eyes are? To me, it was, it just didn't even occur to me. But anyway, it was just kind of funny at the time because it was just a lesson of how whatever we live with day to day is normal to us. And
sure,
so when people have not been around things, they're afraid of it because it's not normal. Not saying that she was afraid, but
sure.
everybody out there, we just need to be exposed to more. We need to learn more. And I encourage people out there, I encourage y'all to please go buy Michael's book, Thunderdog. Go check out his website, michaelhingson.com, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Hingson,
Yeah.
michaelhingson.com.
And then blindedbyfear.com is the other
.net.
site.
.net.
.net.
Yeah.
Blindedbyfear.net. Go check that out and go download the free um, book or chapter or whatever it is that you have now, so that you're ready for when his book comes out. And if you do feel like you need a life coach now, somebody to help you get through whatever it is you're dealing with now, reach out to Michael because he can really help you.
All my contact information and way to reach me immediately directly is on the website. And I hope people will go visit accessibe.com, accessibe.com. And while you're there, you can go to the Accessibe audit tool, plug in your website, if you have a website, and you can see for free how accessible it really is and get a lot of ideas about what needs to be done to fix it.
Yeah.
And if you want, you can sign up for Accessibe. As I said, unless you've got a complicated website of like over 1,000 pages, it's not very expensive. And by adding Accessibe in to make your website more usable, you will gain a tremendous new group of people who will visit your site time and time again because you made it inclusive.
Yeah.
One of the things Accessible is working on, and I'm not sure when it's actually going to come out, is we're actually going to create a database and a complete new search engine of any website that's accessible, whether it uses Accessible or not. It's called
Uh-huh.
Access Find, and we're still working on that, but that'll be exciting when it comes out.
Yeah, I knew y'all were working on it. I didn't know what the status is. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'm really excited to have you here. It's so great to be able to talk with you again and catch up.
Well, thank you. It's been an honor, Lisa, to be here and to have a chance to talk with you and strategize. And I hope people will reach out. I would love to talk with you and help in any way that I can. And of course, being very prejudiced, always looking for speaking things. But I hope you'll buy Thunderdog as well.
Yeah,
And I just want to hear from you. If you've got thoughts about what we said tonight, go to my website and shoot me an email and a contact form. And I'm glad to interact with anyone who reaches out. I will
yeah,
respond.
for sure. He definitely will. So I encourage y'all to do that. Well, thanks so much, Michael, and I look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
See y'all next time.